Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Commio webinar. Hope everybody's enjoying the change in the weather. It's kids are going back to school, everything's changing, but we wanted to get you all together because, along with myself, again, I'm Tim, the Director of Marketing here at Commio. I had to get Scott. Scott, welcome back in, our VP of Customer Retention and Growth and our text messaging guru. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you.
I
Good to be
had to get,
here.
thanks, man. We had to take 30 minutes of your time or so. It's so important as we continue through, this election season. You and I both know that the traffic numbers are incredible coming out of the RNC, now into the DNC. The momentum is huge. Both parties are sending a lot of messages to voters. But then just in general, there's so many businesses that are getting into text messaging, some of them for the first time, and they're hitting some roadblocks. So I thought, and you agreed, and I'm glad you had some time to help me, is I feel like we need to set the foundation again as we go into the end of 2024 and into 2025 and say, look, let's get back to basics. Things have changed. Compliance, every time we get on here, I feel like that's the number one word that comes out. If I had to do a keyword search on the content, it's compliance. And let's
Mhm.
just kind of go through all the steps of, text messaging, the growth, and then the things that everybody needs to keep in mind. So with that, Scott, love to hand it over to you, and we'll get started here with a pretty basic question. Is text messaging, is it right for you? I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's great to be here and thanks for everybody for joining. There's so much data out there and we're not the only ones that have this data that talk about, how powerful text messaging is for connecting with customers. And so, it's 98% open rate. It could, who knows nowadays, right? But 98 seems to be kind of the general value that most people adopt. And it's usually within minutes. Typically for us, like when you get a text message, if your phone beeps, you're at least going to be, well, who is that? Right. And so, in fact, you could be doing a webinar on your phone and like, hold on, Tim, just a second. Oh, spam.
Right.
So, there's so much data, so we won't cover that, right? I mean, it's just a fantastic, mechanism for communicating with customers and human beings. But I think the important thing that people need to understand is when, if you're a business or you're a reseller, it's important to know what you can and cannot do with text messaging. It's not the Wild West that it was 5, 6 years ago. And because of the Wild West, I think this is kind of where we're at. The whole thing around campaign registry and verification and vetting and registering campaigns is a result of the Wild West that we had. So, but first and foremost, right, the most important thing that you got to realize is you can never send content that aligns to what I think it's the CTIA refers to as SHAF: sex, hate, alcohol, firearms, and tobacco. And all the different variations, for example, tobacco, right? That also includes marijuana, cannabis, CBD. Those are forbidden content. Firearms, including ammunition, training, anything related to that, alcohol, and of course, anything related to sexual content, even dating apps are forbidden, not only for the carriers, but also under CTIA. And then, of course, anything that's considered, hate speech and so forth. So remember that acronym SHAFT, and that usually is kind of like your good first start. If you're looking to send content that aligns to that, then you would probably, want to reach out to, someone at Commio or, someone who's maybe a compliance expert and see, well, maybe your use case doesn't violate that CTIA shaft, and maybe there is an opportunity for you to send messages. And there are also quite a bit of restrictions under other approved use cases. For example, as Tim, you mentioned, it's the political season. Everybody's getting political text messages. And so political text messaging is an approved use case, but there are some additional restrictions that you have to, do you align to before you can actually send political messages. One is number one, verifying that you're a registered political entity. I think it's with the FEC, Federal
Hmm.
Elections Commission, and then also a verified nonprofit. And I don't know if I can remember. I don't remember if if it's the 501 or I think it's the 501. So there's an additional step that you have to go through to verify political traffic. So again, there's a lot of different use cases out there, and too many to discuss here. And so you do mention that the use case ebook
Yeah.
kind of goes into quite a bit of detail in each one of those.
That's right. And by the way, just to be clear, we're going to reference some of our ebook material during this webinar, and we're going to send you guys links to all those after this event. It'll also be part of the post when we put this up on our website. So they're easily downloadable, have lots of great information. We keep them updated. We update them probably twice a year now. So recommend if you have any questions about use cases, go grab that ebook and some of the others as well. But with that, obviously, we start with the list, and this is very topical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, messaging is fantastic for everybody, unless you're in one of those forbidden use case or verticals. But it's okay. You've decided that text messaging is right for your business. And then, so what's the very next step? And first thing you have to understand is that you have to have consent from consumers or customers before you can send them a text message. And that's very important. And even if they've been a longtime customer of yours, right, there was a lot of gray area about express written consent versus implied consent. Best practice is to just get written consent and capture it. So even if you've got customers you've done business with for years, it's always good to just send them a what we call a double opt-in, which is a confirmation. Hey, this is Tim from Commio, and we just wanted to confirm that that you want to continue to receive text messages, alerts, and notifications, and so forth, right? Respond with start or respond with yes, and then have your typical opt-out link. Excuse me, available. And I apologize. A couple weeks ago, I got sick in Chicago, and for some reason, I can't shake this cough. So I apologize if I'm coughing in everybody's ears. I'll try to avoid that. But
That's all right. But Scott,
FYI.
I think just one important question about that is totally understand you send a double opt-in text. So it's incumbent upon the person who's capturing that opt-in to literally capture it, right? And what are some of the ways for people to capture that so it's available? Because sometimes you're going to get audited. Somebody's going to ask, right? So how do you
Yeah, and so
provide that?
this is a very critical thing, and this topic is really important because it seems like right now we've seen more activity around proof of opt-in from the
Mhm.
mobile carriers. So, if for some reason, your opt-out percentage starts to climb, and there's a lot of different areas of what that is. Is it 2%, maybe 4% of your total send, right? If they're getting, stops or opt-outs for that. If it's successful, they may actually go in and start pulling. It'll get assigned to someone on a compliance team. Let's say it's Verizon or T-Mobile. They're going to go in and start actually looking at the messages that are being sent under your use case or your campaign. If they start seeing inbound responses like "Stop! I don't know who you are. Why do you keep texting me?" Right? They're going to give that perception that you don't have consent from those consumers or those subscribers. And so they may ask you to go, okay, well, you know what? We need you to prove opt-in. Show us the opt-in information for these 6 mobile subscribers. And what they're looking for is really proof of opt-in. Give me the date and time that they filled out your contact form. What was their IP address that they were coming in under? And depending on the situation, they may even ask, do you have additional verification data on this particular subscriber? There are some software utilities out there like Active Prospect. You may know it as Trusted Form that can actually capture that motion of checking that box or even signing a digital signature. So the more information that you can capture, the better, right? Because that just kind of says, no, this person came to our website on Thursday the 5th, and they went to our site. Here is their mouse clicking that button, and here I am just basically agreeing that they're opting in to receive the text message. That's a cut and dry case, and it usually basically once you provide that, it goes away. So capturing the opt-in, but then also keeping that data for an extended period of time. I mean, indefinitely would be ideal, but I think at least a minimum of 6 months is going to be really important. And those third-party softwares like Active Prospect, I think they have quite a bit of options on how to store that data. So yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
Scott, I think that's great. And I think to move on to your second bullet here, like is this as a marketer, I totally get this. You cannot buy or even sell a list that has opted in numbers. It's got to be, so I guess the right words are first party opt-in, right? You're capturing
first party
data.
opt-in.
Right.
FCC made that extremely clear,
Yeah.
several months ago, right? That there, and this was really kind of, I think they were calling it the lead gen leap or loophole.
Right.
But if you are getting, if you want to text somebody, you have to have direct one-to-one consent from that subscriber. So that's a best practice. Just always operate under, the assumption that you need to have direct consent.
You got it. And as you said here, maintain that proof of opt-in. You just said at least 6 months. Probably seems like a year or more would probably be better if you can. And
Mhm.
also then scrub that list against the do not call list, right? Remove those landline inactive numbers. Like you gotta run a clean operation here.
Yeah, and it's we want to run a lot of traffic, and one of the things that we see is that a lot of our customers have really clean, content. They have good brands. Their spam filtering is low. It means that they're not really being filtered or they're not being blocked for spam. But one of the things that does count against them is an error rate for unknown number or unreachable handset. So if you've got, say you're sending out 100,000 messages and 30,000 of your messages are being, let's say, well, 20,000 of your messages are being rejected and not delivered because the actual phone number you're sending the text message to is bad. The carrier's like, we can't deliver this message. We don't know who the subscriber is. The number's not active or whatever that may be, but that gives the carrier the impression that you have old, outdated lists and or that you don't have direct opt-in, right? So this was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you need to be able to scrub your data, per TCPA to make sure you're not sending messages or making phone calls to people on the do not call list. And so that's a super critical point because that is looked at, and if the carriers see excessive blocking or failures due to bad numbers, they're going to assume that you don't have consent, and they're going to start they'll issue an RCA where you have to go and prove that. So.
Gotcha. And you end here with document, 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 right? You
Mhm.
got to keep that documentation.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where once you create a process and a procedure for it, it's not as what's the word I want to use?
Onerous?
Overwhelming, yeah,
Yeah.
onerous. But it's really important. And I think, and chances are 9 out of 10 times you're not going to be asked for this information, but the one time you are, it's important to have it.
Yeah.
So
I feel like Scott is the same thing we saw in like the contact center call space, before Stir Shaken and now
mhm.
after Stir Shaken, like, now we're at testing calls and people have, you got to maintain records, you got to scrub against the DNC. It's the same thing for messaging. So I feel like messaging is catching up and I think, nowadays with communications being so personal, especially, we don't want to have junk on our smartphones. And it was just, it's one more professional layer that all the businesses need to keep in mind when they're getting into this space.
Yeah, it's spot on. The government, the mobile carriers, and everybody in between. Even companies like Commio. It's really important to keep the guys who are bad actors, right? The fraudsters, the people who are phishing, who really just have ill intent towards mobile subscribers. That's what all of this is really designed to do, is keep those people away.
Yeah.
The registration process and now all whether it's 10 DLC local numbers, toll-free short code, everything is verified now. It all has to be registered and verified before you can send messaging out on it. So and that's Commio's policy. I don't know if I think the carriers are close to kind of drawing that line, saying everything has to be registered. But really,
Yeah.
it's a traceback system, right? It's designed to have layers of security to prevent it from happening in the first place. And if it does happen, it gives the carriers and the government agencies visibility to the perceived sender, whoever sent that message,
Yeah.
right? So that's where we're going.
Well, and I will say, just as a quick aside, as someone who has to vet inbound leads for Cameo, that one of the big red flags we have, most companies are above board. They already have this process or they're attuned to it. They will establish it. We'll make sure that it's happening. They don't get in trouble. They send good content. It's the folks that come to us that are in a super hurry. Oh my gosh, we got to get this campaign up. And they want to rush, rush, rush. And if any of you on this call are reselling messaging services, I want you to that should be your first red flag.
Mhm.
Along with all the other know your customer pieces that we all have to go through nowadays. You got to verify tax ID, verify all those different things. If they're registered in Wyoming, you're probably in trouble. But on top of that, if they're in a hurry, that's a huge red flag. So sorry, just an aside.
Oh, you mean
But
like I got 100 million messages to send tomorrow?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, your sales guys are super excited, but your compliance people should put their warning light on and
Yeah.
vet the
Yeah.
heck out of that
Oh
customer.
boy,
So,
what is that stuff for eco fraud? So,
yeah. And by the way, never sign a new customer or start them on a Friday. Okay, we could have a whole webinar
oh,
just about this.
you
Anyway,
should. You should have a
yes.
webinar on this.
We
So,
could share so many learnings for sure.
yeah.
But yeah, let's talk more about these opt-in forms because I love your examples there on the right-hand side as well.
Yeah, opt-in forms. In fact, I would also add as a caveat, including privacy policies, the probably the number one and two, or you could just call it the number one reason a campaign gets rejected, and whether that's toll-free 10 DLC and core short code especially, is because it doesn't have a privacy policy and or the required opt-in language. And so, the language, you have a couple examples here. And to be honest, this is something that's changed, right? A year ago was just a simple opt-in. Yes, I agree to receive text messages from XYZ company. And now the carriers want to see this actually broken down, right? So what you have to do is, number one, you can't say by checking this box, I agree to the policy, the privacy policy, the terms and conditions, and to receive email and text messages, right? So first and foremost, your opt-in cannot for text messaging cannot be grouped in with email. It cannot be tied to the T's and C's excuse me, and the privacy policy, right? It has to be separate. There's a separate consent opt-in for text messaging as a standalone. And then the second part of that is if your use case includes alerts and notifications, but you also want to include some promotional marketing, let the customer know about sales and things like that, you have to break those consent boxes out for each one of those use cases,
Mm,
right? You can't just say, well, as a subscriber, they're consenting to receive everything that we want to send them, right? They may want to receive alerts and notifications regarding their account, right? But they don't necessarily want to receive marketing communications via text message, and you have to give them the ability to pick and choose, right? Also, you have to disclose how they can get help. You have to disclose how they can opt out, and then you also have to disclose. This is real important too, that the message frequency, how many messages they can expect to receive. A good stopgap for that is message frequency may vary, and then also the message and data rates apply.
hmm
If you're applying for something like a short code and you have any of those things missing, it's immediately declined. They're like, nope, you got to go back and add all of the stuff in here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so
yeah, it's
that second box in the light blue teal area, it's
mhm.
all there. That's a perfect example. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And that's kind of how they should look, or it should have your brand information and so forth. But
Yeah,
that's kind of like that should be the expectation of what opt-ins should look like. So
right.
again, when we see a lot of opt-in or campaigns being declined because they don't even have an opt-in at all,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So and we have that on excuse me, sorry. We have further down a couple slides on this, but if you're a reseller, it's important to make sure that your customers, before they submit campaigns, right, that you pre-vet this, you double check to make sure they have a privacy policy. That states you can't share. I think it's listed here, right? We do not share data with third parties, right? So for the mobile carriers, what they're looking for is verbiage that states that they don't share mobile subscriber info with third parties. If you have a bold statement on your privacy policy that states that, that's all they're looking for. Once they see that, they can check that box. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to remove, let's say you may share third party information with, about email or other information. Of course, obviously if there's, with government agencies, if there's a subpoena, you have to share that information. So,
Right.
but typically for messaging, that's what they're looking for, right? And I think you have it there in that dark box at the bottom.
Yeah, and I like Scott too that, and I have seen this more recently. I actually like to opt in to get messages, especially from brands that I want to do business with, and I love that they give me an option. Like I want to get their coupons and their
Mhm.
special offers, but I don't want to get X, Y, and Z, or I don't want to, or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe it's, I'm subscribing to a service. I want to know when the service is down, they're having technical problems, but don't send me special offers. And I should be able to check that. It should be a checkbox and it should work through your
Yep.
system.
Yeah.
So,
And the carriers are looking for that. They're looking for it broken down that way. Now, not everybody does that. But as you stated, if you can make your opt-outs look like that, you have a 99% chance of getting at least that part of the vetting process approved. And the
Yeah.
last important thing here, when we say easy way and I have the S there to opt out, TCPA law requires that you have opt out on your messaging traffic. Best practice is to include it on every text message,
Yep.
right? And one of the things that I like to do is what you can say is like reply stop at any time to end or to cancel.
Yep.
If you're constrained for characters, depending on your content, right, you can streamline that a little bit and just say stop to end. But that's always the best practice. And when carriers see your campaigns that have your message samples look like that, they're like, okay, this person's got it. This is exactly what we're looking for, right? Is that they're applying a best practice here.
And by
The
the way,
other thing
Scott,
that's also good is giving consumers the ability to opt out to your website. They can go to your website. They can, on the form, there's like a certain thing like, click here to opt out of text messaging, and they click that and they can put their info, right? Not necessarily required, but if you have multiple ways for subscribers to opt out, then it's an additional layer of protection.
yeah. And oh, by the way, Scott, not for nothing, but make sure when people reply stop that you actually reply and say that we received it and you're opted out. Because I can't tell you how many of these
I'm glad you
lately.
brought that up.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
yeah, I hit
think we
stop
had
and nothing
a bullet
happens, and I'm
to
like, guys, you're killing us. Now I'm
Yep.
going to report you. You know,
Yeah, we didn't have a bullet on that. I'm glad you brought that up. And that's best practice, right? Is to provide a single opt-out confirmation to
right
the customer. And you still have your brand identifier, Commio, colon, you have been successfully unsubscribed.
there you go.
That's it. You
Yep,
can't have any, you can't provide a link back to your website. You just need to provide a confirmation. And per TCPA, you are allowed one confirmation, one final message to be sent, which is that confirmation to the subscriber once they've opted out. So,
got it.
yeah, and keep in mind, note stop, capital STOP, which was in it's in the sample right there. That is the industry standard for opting out. So if you can use stop, that you stop, right? But you can also use end, you can use cancel. Some people use no, but using industry standard stop, right, is best practice.
Yeah. And by the way, too, just before we move on, Scott, just want to reiterate to everybody, obviously we're recording the session. We'll provide it to you along with a link to a PDF version of these slides. So we'd love to make sure that you get all this great information, including these examples. And also, by the way, if you have questions as we go, feel free to put them into the Q&A or the chat. I am monitoring them. So I already had one or two questions about the content, so covered that. But if you have anything along the way, we'd love to pepper those through. So let us know. So now let's talk about formats, which I think is fun. And obviously, everybody knows the amazing short code, but it takes a lot of time, right, to get one of these, or it used to take a lot of time.
It really depends on what the use case is, how, short codes have to be approved by each and every mobile carrier, or we call them mobile network operators that you want to send to. So if you want to do a short code, we did one for just a single carrier. It was US Cellular. We got that short code approved within 10 days,
Mm,
start to finish, right? And US Cellular is usually the first one to, to receive the application and look at it and approve it. If you're trying to get a use case approved and it's for Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, US Cellular, plus all of the smaller, tier two and tier three carriers, that could take a little bit longer. That could take, 4 to 6 weeks, could be more depending on how much back and forth. And I think the important thing that's going to really determine your time frame is how prepared the application is. If you submit an application and we work with you, short codes, we will work with you one-on-one. We don't have some simple form that you fill out and that's the end of it. We will work with you. We'll have a call to discuss what the use case is, the application process. There is a form, but there's a very specific criteria of how you fill out that form and information you have to provide. And we walk you through that, right? So really what happens through that process, that optimized application, almost immediately goes to the carriers for approval, and the carriers look at that, and they're not going to, the time frames from the back and forth. Well, Verizon says, "Well, can you explain this? Your message sample says this, but and so they have a question, right? It's not clear to them. Boom, you just added a week onto that process, right? And then Verizon may take another 2 or 3 weeks to look at your response. So most of the delays with short codes are the back and forth, right? So the key is to make sure that application's spot on when you submit it. Everything's clear and concise, and that's where we see the most success.
So Scott, what would you say is like the most standard use case for using short codes? Like I know we don't get quite as many of those, lately. But just I'm just
Mhm.
curious, when people are applying, like what are they using it for?
Yeah, I think, for anybody that's on the call, I mean, you kind of look at your inbox and see what type of messages you get from shortcode, right? It's a national vendor, maybe it's an airline, maybe it's from a national retail chain. It could be from your school, right? Shortcodes are really ideal for large volume or broadcast type of messagings that the messaging that needs to go out in a very short period of time.
Hmm.
Typically, once you get a short code, there's not as much filtering, so delivery is usually the best that you can get. And the process, like I said, we talked about it. It can be slow, but that's typically what it's for. I would attest this to be like a nationwide distribution of text messaging for an alert or for some kind of a notification.
Yeah. And I like the example here too, the 1-800-Flowers. I do feel like it's mostly sort of notification of orders and things like that that are built into somebody's e-commerce system if they're big enough, right? They tend to be
Right.
pretty big. Yeah. And
Yeah.
by, and by the way, Scott, before we go any farther, so love the discussion of short code. Paul had a great question, which this is sort of the elephant in the room question, which is, hey, based on the fines that I see are now possible, we've opted to not offer SMS in any way. For example, T-Mobile, there's a big fine for breaking the rules. I think it's what, $10,000. And the question is, how often does this or any fine actually get levied against any of the users that we know about?
All right. So great question. To my knowledge, I am not aware of a single instance of where T-Mobile has fined somebody for gray routing or, some bad activity. So, not to say that they couldn't,
Yeah,
but, so I'm not aware of it. And I think a lot of it is, you know, personally, it could be just for posturing, right? Is that, there's a threat of that. And if it's bad enough, it absolutely could. And I think that's the goal though, right? Is that we're through the whole process, we're trying to avoid any content or sender, right, that would put
trigger it.
anybody in a situation where they would be looking at a fine like that.
Yeah. And usually, I think you'd agree, because Scott, you and I are the ones who keep all of our documentation updated,
Mhm.
which is, it felt like it was a weekly thing not that long ago, but it's settled down in the last 6, 8 months, I would say. Um, is that as long as you're using an established use case, you're a business, we know that the use case aligns with things that we know the carriers are okay with. The risk is minuscule for getting those types of fines because you're capturing the opt-in, you're stopping it when people hit, stop. Your message isn't drifting from the original use case. You've registered your campaigns, your numbers are fine. Like we certainly understand that there's trepidation about those potential fines, but it's the people that are pushing the envelope, I think you'd agree, and the people that have customers of customers underneath them that they can't monitor as closely as they'd like. That's kind of
Mhm.
where I think the real danger lies. And of course, we've had rare cases where somebody had a data breach and somebody got into somebody's system and sent some messages they weren't supposed to
Mhm.
send. That's easily proven that things were going on. Anyway, I'm not to say that you shouldn't be cognizant of the potential downsides, but like you said, it's mostly posturing. We're not seeing those big fines being levied, and you just got to make sure you have all your processes in place. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And this is definitely where, if you're new to the space, right, we can definitely help you with that.
Yeah.
Through, campaign, the 10DLC campaign registry, has been around for a while. And I do believe that we, as an industry, have, exited a large volume of bad actors
Yeah.
out of the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and now as the campaign registry has been improved and filtering and monitoring have been improved, these cases are going to become few and far between. And when they do happen, really, it's going to come down to the severity of the violation. So,
Exactly. Yeah. Well said. All right. So, good old long code, local numbers. These are my
yeah,
favorite.
long code,
Yeah.
right? Everybody,
Hmm.
sorry about the coughing there. Yeah, long code, right? Local phone numbers, also known as 10DLC, 10-digit long code. And I think these are ideal. I mean, obviously, people love them for phone calls, telemarketing, because everybody's more likely to answer a call or even a text message from a local number. And if you're like me, I don't have every one of my vendors, my doctors, my auto service place. I don't have their stuff in my phone. I don't have their numbers memorized. So when I get a text message or a call from one of these numbers, I'm like, well, that could be my doctor. I better answer it, or I better read it, right? And then boom, and that's the whole point, is that there's a perception that it's somebody local, or it's somebody known to the subscriber. And that's why they do it. And local 10DLC, I think, still has the highest percentage of open rates compared to like toll free and short code, for that reason alone.
That's right. Well, as you mentioned here, you still have to, register your brands in your campaigns. The throughput is certainly smaller than short code, but it's still robust enough for most uses that would come through us for sure. Um,
Mhm.
and you got to be cognizant the campaign registry is specifically concerned with 10DLC, right?
That is exclusive to 10-digit long code. And that whole process, right, is really to make sure, the people sending the message are who they say they are, and also to kind of put restrictions on content, right? So once you have a campaign registry, the first thing is the brand. How does that brand score? So the amount of volume that a business can send through, let's say, 10 DLC, is really driven by that company, right? How long have they been in business? Are they US based? Do they have a digital footprint? Like, how well known are they, right? So I think one of the criteria was like, if you were, is it the Russell 4000? Any
Hmm.
company that's in the Russell 4000, or maybe the 2000, I can't remember, automatically is like a major brand, and it's like almost an instant approval. Everybody knows who they are. And then the next part of that is, okay, so I'm a company, you know who I am. I've been around forever. I got a brand score of 90. But I want to send this use case. The use case could be, I want to do mixed marketing, alerts, notification of TP. It could be, education, whatever that use case may be, right? So that also adds to, that layer of throughput and deliverability. Like, how if you're doing mixed marketing and you have a brand score of 50, you're going to be throttled. In fact, I think the low level for this is 2,000 messages per day. And if you get scored low, right, there are mechanisms in place where you can pay additional money to get a higher score. You have to go through a deeper vetting process. So again, that ebook has a lot of that in there. But so that's the whole process, right? How much you can send really depends on who you are as a company and the use case, what type of messaging you want to send.
Yeah, and you did mention to your last bullet here is there are registration fees based on the use case. And by the way, you can get that whole current up-to-date list if you go to our website, commio.com. If you click on the resources, you'll see the messaging surcharges link, and we break out all the different registration fees and surcharges based on carrier and all those other things. So
Yep.
something to keep in mind. And I think what in general, Scott, we're talking like what, 10, 15, $20 per, registration.
Yeah,
Some are
there's a
higher.
brand registration fee, and then I think the
Yeah,
actual campaign fees can be anywhere from $4 to $10 a month,
there you
right?
go.
And that's
And,
just for registration. Well, there's also, for 10 DLC, there's a $15 vetting fee. So
yeah,
when you submit a campaign, not a brand, once your brand's approved and you submit a campaign, for it goes into the DCA, and the DCA looks at all the stuff that you said that you want to send. They look at who you are, they look at your content, they go to your website, right? This is the website I'm sending in my text message. They're going to go look at that website. They're going to check the privacy policy. Does it say that they share mobile subscriber info with third parties? Okay, well, let's go to the opt-in form, right? You provide, here's where people go to our website to opt in to receive text messages. That person is going to go look at that to make sure that all of those required components that we already talked about are on that contact form, that opt-in.
yep,
And so yeah, so there's a fee. That's that $15 fee per campaign. And that's in addition to the brand registration fee, which I think is a one-time fee. And then you have your standard campaign fees. And depending on the campaign, I could be wrong. It's on our website in the
yep.
ebook. I think that each campaign, I think, is at least valid for 3 months or something
Yeah.
like that.
And I
I don't
think it
remember.
just all adds up to, look, the numbers aren't that large, guys, but when you start adding up how many, potentially, depending on if you're a reseller, how many of these campaigns are going to be submitted, the dollar values add up. You could potentially get irritated, customers and clients. That's why it's so important. We always say this is dot your I's and cross your T's before you submit your registrations. Make sure that the use cases are aligned, that your sample messages are actual sample messages, that they have the stop, they have the right language. Like you can't think of registration as something that you just sort of submit offhanded. You don't submit that until you're ready and everything is in place, right?
Yeah, yeah, when we first started doing the registry, everybody was submitting
Yeah.
like draft. It's like, even some of them said draft. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, your
Nope.
your campaign, when you're ready to submit, it has to be your final proof.
Right.
Nothing can change, right?
Yep.
So this is what our URL is going to look like this, and this is probably what our message sounds like. But that's,
Right.
no, that's a draft. Make sure your final version, and I think we have a slide on this as well, so maybe we'll save it for that.
Okay, great. Oh, good. All right. Now, toll free.
Oh, the fun toll free.
Yeah.
And so
Is it
toll free is
fun?
another option. And currently there is toll frees have to be verified. There's a form, for Commio. You can do it on our website. I think we can even accept them now through APIs. But so you have to basically fill out a lot of the same information, who your company is. Maybe I think the FEIN's on there, your address, and then also provide your use case. What type of content, are you sending? Is it K through 12 or is it marketing? Message. So it's a very similar, campaign submission process. But the as far as toll free goes today, it is not incurring any additional campaign vetting fees or any fees at all for just submitting the campaign, right? Like 10DLC has. So you fill out the form, you submit it. If it's approved, then you have your standard usage fees and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. And you say here at the bottom, all toll-free numbers should be SMS enabled. Absolutely. Right. People will expect, like, my son's 22. He absolutely would rather text with you than call you. So
Mhm.
that's why we recommend, especially if you have a number that's well known, you should text enable it and be monitoring it. At
Yeah,
least. Yeah.
I think most people would be shocked, especially new, businesses that are new to messaging. They're probably would be shocked and maybe get sick if they realized how many consumers are trying to text their toll-free number.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So yeah, and so that's an incredible tool to have, right? Is having your toll-free, accept inbound text messages from
That's right.
subscribers.
And the good news is
Um,
the technology exists now that you don't even have to port your number. We can still enable the text messaging and be able to make sure that you're getting those messages. You don't have to move the number.
Yeah,
And
you can keep it right, right. So
yeah,
you can, if you have a number that's tied with, like, let's say a Ring Central or somebody, or you have a
right.
number that's going through, it's tied to a PBX or another carrier. You can
Yep.
keep all your voice on one carrier, and you can actually have, let's say, Commio run your
Yep.
messaging traffic for that number, right? So there's a nice, we call that off net,
That's right.
um, but we have a mechanism for that. So, and the
Yep.
last thing on toll free, so it really is designed for businesses and commercial.
Yeah.
And but that being said, right, once you are sending toll free traffic, it does tend to be filtered a little bit heavier than definitely short code and 10 DLC.
Yeah. But I think what we should take from this is it can get a little confusing. What are the costs involved? What are the registration steps? All those things. Like if you're new to this and you're trying to decide which format to use, just give us a call. Let us walk through your use case with you. Whether you use us for it or not, we'd love to be able to just, guide you in the right direction and give you the pros and cons. And, picking the right one the first time is important. And
Yeah.
it used to be there's the word again, onerous. That's my word for the day.
Yeah.
Um, it's a lot
Yeah.
easier now if you have the right folks that can help you walk through all the steps. And
Yeah.
believe me, we do it all day. So we'd be happy
Yeah.
to help.
And to
Yeah.
that point too, there's also something, the opt-out rates that the DCA uses for toll-free are typically lower than what the threshold is with the other carriers, let's say for short code and 10 DLC, right? So it seems like there's less tolerance for opt-out or high opt-out on toll-free than there is others. So
Gotcha. Okay. So we talked about toll free. We talked about short codes and long codes, but now there's some new three-letter acronyms creeping in, and one of them is RCS, right?
yeah, RCS is, I'm sure everybody on the call has probably heard that acronym, Rich Communication Service or Services. And the good news is that it seems like Apple is now on board supporting this. And so was at a conference a couple weeks ago where I got sick and heard a lot more about what's going to happen with RCS. So it sounds like this is going to be something that's going to be late Q4, maybe Q1 2025. But there is substantial movement in the RCS space and the whole messaging ecosystem altogether. So uh, I think we're definitely committed to providing RCS solutions for our customers, and we're in lockstep with the other industry experts and manufacturers and carriers. in the entire process. So, really excited that we'll have a lot of information to share in the coming months about where this is going and how we're going to be offering it. But, the good thing, I don't know, I said if you're an existing, message, sending text messages and you're frustrated with the fee structures, the good news is that it's data and there's not any, not to say that it could change, right? But right now it doesn't seem like there's any carrier, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile surcharges that are going to be potentially applied to RCS traffic.
Hmm.
So it could make messaging affordable again. We'll wait and see.
Yeah. A lot of things, a lot of water under the bridge until we're ready to go to market with it. But I do love the example that we have here. There's so many things you can do with RCS, and it's sort of like growing up text messages, right? Like,
Mhm.
text only, maybe an image if you're lucky, if you're doing MMS. But now with RCS, it just takes it to that next level, which is really interesting.
Oh yeah, this is a great example. I've seen other examples, with people marketing products and services. You have images of your product. It could be a motion image, even a little video, and then you can have, place order now. Like it's just a
Yeah.
whole new, paradigm for communications, and it's pretty exciting. It's well overdue, and it's, from what I understand, I mean, the rest of the world has probably already had the benefits of RCS, and the U.S. markets have been kind of slow to adopt it, but it sounds like that's changing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
exciting stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. All right. So let's talk about copy because we know that this is something that people ask us questions about this all the time. Like we're reviewing people's messages, and these are just some of the tips we normally give to them, right?
hmm Yeah, I mean, content is good content is super critical. And there's several things that you can do to make sure that it's optimized, not only for delivery, but it's also, it's optimized that's not going to get flagged by the carriers, right? I mean, the important thing is that you want your messages delivered to the subscriber. You want them to read your message, and you ideally want them to, follow the call to action, whatever that may be. So, messaging, and I always kind of look at like, I look at what type of messaging that I like, right? I would say to everybody else, consider what kind of messages you like. But there's also some requirements. First and foremost is that your message has to have a brand identifier. If you're a business or you're a reseller, your customers have to identify who they are. Um, I've seen it as, ideally you'd say, for example, Commio. You would actually spell out the word Commio colon or Commio dash, and then whatever the message may be. Some companies, if your company name is long, you could probably break it down into an acronym. If it was Commio Messaging Services, right, it'd be CMS, and then have the content. So you always got to have the brand identifier at the front, who you are, and then you get into your actual message, and then the message, keep it brief, less is more. Tone is one of those things too. I don't know, especially in the political space, right? If you receive a text message, hey Tim, I guess you don't want to take advantage of this 25% offer. We'll just give it to the next person.
Right.
Right? That's got a really negative tone to it. And you're going to be like, no, I'm on a 7726 sheet of Verizon and file a complaint. Right? Message tone is a thing. So make sure it's neutral, it's conversational, not abrasive. Um, Make sure they don't have anything that's right. I mean, by this point, you shouldn't have anything that's going to be violating any of the CTIA shaft or TCPA rules. And then your URLs. And this is important. So if your brand is Commio, right, the URL that you're submitting in your text messages really needs to have Commio in it. You need to have the brand in the URL needs to match the brand that's registered with the campaign. Right, very important. So you can't have Commio as the brand and then start sending text messages as, Tim's excuse me, Tim's webinar service
Yeah.
in the URL, right? So that's not compliant.
Well,
And if
oh,
you're going to be using tracking IDs, a lot of people in the
yeah.
marketing space, right, performance marketing, you want to track that message, who it went to, and you want to, so when they respond to it, you want to be able to have that data on the back end. So that would be like Commio / and then XY532, whatever the tracking ID is, right? You don't want to have that tracking ID in the beginning. You don't really want to basically take your brand URL and consolidate that into an acronym as well, right? You don't want to say cms.com / whatever. People are like, well, who the hell, who's CMS?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Commio. All right. Well, right. So there's best practices around the URLs. And the vetting teams, the pre-vetting teams, and the compliance teams at the DCAs and the carriers, they're looking for this stuff. They're looking to make sure that your URLs match and that they meet compliance.
Yeah. And
Sorry, that's a long-winded.
no, it's fine.
Long-winded.
But I think we also glossed over a really important piece, which is you cannot use shorteners like Bitly's
Correct.
or the old Googles. Yeah, you need to use an actual domain, your actual domain.
Yeah.
Which is by in the first example, look, hi Matt, like we don't know who that message is from, and it's coming with a Bitly. Like everything about that message is wrong. Needs to be cleaned up. And the second one also, hey, Sherry, your dental appointment, that's fine, but which dentist is this, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like we don't know who that is. Um, yeah. So there's always room for improvement. And by the way, I love your last bullet is get your content approved internally before you submit. So
Mhm.
ideally, you want to have some sort of a person that is the person who's going to edit this, right? They're going to look at it. They're going to look at
Yeah,
all.
there's one if you're big enough, maybe you have a copywriter,
Yeah.
right? And maybe you have a compliance manager, right? They should double check it before you submit it. But it's really important, to make sure that, what you're submitting is the final version. Here's another thing we got a bullet there. Use grammar and spell check. I can't tell you how many campaigns that we see and the message samples that
Yeah.
are being submitted have misspelled words,
Right.
right? And the perception is, when you get a text message and they're misspelling the word, about vote and, or, just common, you basic, language, you're like, does this come from someone overseas? You assume that it's a fraudster because of the misspelled words. And
Yeah.
no US-based commercial entity would send something like this, right? So then it's like either number one, you're just going to delete it, or you may report it as spam because it just looks and smells like it's fraud.
Yeah.
So use grammar and spell check. It's easy. Make sure it's readable, right? Conversational, and you'll have a lot more success with that.
There you go. Yeah, and let's talk about providers because as you and I both know, there are a lot of folks out there that sort of offer this ability to send messages, but there's a difference between those that can help you out, right?
Yeah, I think I'm hoping we're giving off that vibe
Yeah.
today on this webinar, right? Is that a lot of people are out there, and there's a lot of people who are claiming, we're an ISV and we're new to the space, but we're experts on this. And typically, what they're experts on is just kind of parroting what they find on the TCPA website, CTIA. What we bring to the table really is understanding not only what's required, what compliance is, but really what works, right? Your ultimate goal is to use text messaging to communicate a message, right? Or to sell a product or service. And so we understand what the carriers like. We understand what works and what doesn't work. Your goal is to get that message delivered, read, and ideally some kind of an action from the consumer. And that's where we can help you do that. So, and we do that, like I said, on the short codes, those applications, we work with you one-on-one. We know specifically what the carriers want to see, right? And we're not going to have you go do a bunch of stuff that they don't care about, but we know immediately that they're going to flag this. You need to have this, you need to have this, you need to have this. It needs to be written like this and worded like this, right? And this isn't coaching. We're not teaching you how to, bypass the, to evade filtering or compliance. What we're doing is really showing you, really what is best practices and apply that to your use case, your business.
Yeah, and I think the last bullet is so important, Scott, because like I know you and the rest of the team, like you guys are talking to representatives from our upstream, providers, the mobile carriers themselves. Like when there's an issue, you need a team that has those relationships who can go to bat for you. And it's something that we spend a fair amount of time on
Mhm.
misunderstandings, things that, whatever it is. But, when something happens and something will happen, you want to make sure somebody can actually go to bat with you.
Yeah, that's a huge point. So Commio we have direct vetting teams at all the different DCAs for short code, 10DLC, and toll free. And we do see the people that are vetting your campaigns before they get approved, they're not always US based. They may be overseas. And it's unfortunate, but we see a lot of campaigns being rejected because of a typo, right? And we will go to bat. We have direct escalation paths at every company, and we can say, no, we're going to dispute this rejection because you rejected it because the HTTPS was missing the S. But when you go to the website, it's clearly secure. So you can have a situation where vetting teams at these companies will look at it and they'll say, well, there's no privacy policy, where clearly there was a privacy policy. They just didn't take the time and effort to go look at it, which was one click on the website. So, for a lot of our competitors, it's them sending an email to support at XYZ company, and within a couple of days they get a response on that campaign. For us, we have the individuals that vet them, and we will go immediately to them and say, hey, you just rejected this. That information is there. Here's the link.
Yep.
And then they'll respond back within 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes saying, oh, yeah, sorry, totally missed that. Boom, campaign approved.
Yep.
Right. That's what you need, right? You need to have people that, a provider that understands how it all works, but also understands that when there's a problem, they can quickly get it fixed for you.
That's right. You got it. And by the way, I think Scott, before we get into actually, I think this is probably a good time to start with this question before we go through this, which is, if you're basically reselling the service, there are certain things that you need to keep in mind. And I already mentioned know your customer. But before we get to this, Paul just asked a great question to lead us into this slide, which is, look, we actually considered reselling SMS, but we were confused by what a campaign is. So what constitutes a campaign? What he says is, it seems like the short incident messages, like your appointment at 2 p.m. is coming up, that those aren't campaigns, while a marketing campaign is clearly a campaign. So, what is a campaign?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question, right? So in the marketing world of campaigns, like, hey, we're going to launch this campaign for the next 6 months. We're going to send out text messages to 20 million people, and we're going to promote a product. It's going to go to this website. That's the call to action. Like that's a marketing campaign. I don't think the carriers are as sophisticated of why they call it a campaign. So really what it's kind of grouping it into is almost maybe like a project. Like, hey, you're going to be sending text messages, one-time passwords, 2FA, verification numbers, things like that. They look at it as like, really a campaign it's not necessarily a start and a finish to a particular project. It could be ongoing. It could last for years. It's just kind of how they look at this is basically what we're going to be using the text messaging for,
Right? Like
right?
it's a use case, right? More
A
than a
use
campaign.
case and a campaign, right? So the
Yeah.
campaign can be, we see that a lot with political. Well, political campaign is, hey, I got to get out 5 million messages to this state, right, in the next 3 days. That is a very specific campaign. It has a start date and a finish date. If you're a business that has OTP 2FA, you're just sending alerts to your customers. That could be never ending. It could be perpetual, right? So that campaign really it goes on forever. But really what that campaign is, it's basically what we're using the messaging for. Hope that
Gotcha.
answers the question.
Yeah. And by the way, Paul, just do yourself a favor, go over to commio.com, click on resources, click on the SMS surcharges link, and it will list, what everybody, calls a campaign, the different types, the costs, and you'll certainly see where all those buckets or use cases are of what you need to label each of those when you're
Let me add
submitting.
to that. So, again, you can have use cases, right? And the use case could be mixed marketing, it could be political, it could be K through 12, higher education, whatever it is. But so your use cases, this is kind of the vertical we're in, and then you can have multiple campaigns within that use case. So that campaign one is, hey, we're going to send local text messages to people in California. Right. Then we're going to have a separate campaign that we're going to run for people in, North Carolina and like so you can have multiple campaigns within that use case, right?
Mm,
So it really, and for the customer, it could be one campaign that's for everything, right? Or you're can be using the campaign based on the use case for very specific geographies or specific purposes.
Yeah, I think Scott,
So,
and this is what harkens back to again. There's some gray areas here, and that's where somebody like Cameo can help guide you. If you have a customer of a customer, they have this question, we can say, well, you might want to look at the mixed use case, but that might limit your
mhm.
throughput. This really smells more like this, and we can actually vet it, pre-vet before you actually submit to make sure it's going to get through. So to
Yep.
kind of take that weight off your shoulders. But by the way, and I'm glad you asked to add this slide in here, Scott, because one of the things that we confront is, we work a lot one-on-one with big companies, right? And those are really straightforward. Like, hey, we run this kind of business. We want to send this kind of message. Great. This is what the campaign type is. We get it all established. But if you're a CSP and you're reselling it, there's some other steps you got to go through that are so important because to keep not only you, but let's be honest, keep us out of trouble as well.
Yep.
And it all starts with vetting those new customers. I already mentioned the biggest red flag is somebody's in a big fat hurry because guess what? They just got kicked off another vendor. They're trying to
Hmm.
find another vendor to send some junk traffic. You gotta just take a very cold analytical start to any relationship and say, great, we'd love to help you. Let's start with knowing we need to know you as a new customer.
Hmm.
Like, let's kind of, so KYC is the watchword of 2024, right?
It is. And just for clarification, CSP is, I think, content service provider, right? So this is going to be like a reseller.
Hmm.
And I think CSP is referenced in the campaign registry ecosystem. So, and Tim, you're spot on. I mean, most of the the complaints or the more serious type of complaints that we've had came from a reseller who was allowing some brand or entity access to their platform. They didn't
Right.
write the content, but their customer did.
Yep.
And their customer started, sending non-compliant traffic or doing nefarious stuff, right? So it's super important. And in KYC, I don't know if anybody saw this that came out. The FCC levied a $2 million fine against an entity. This was on the voice side of things, and there was definitely some KYC violations there. And so the FCC is really cracking down on this. So if you're a reseller or CSP and you're onboarding new customers, it's the government's expectation that you deeply vet who they are. Make sure, and we have an entire vetting process. We have a form.
Yep.
If you're looking like, well, God, I don't even know what to ask. What is KYC? We can actually help you answer that question. We can tell you exactly what the things that you're looking for, what are red flags, what's a good customer, bad customer, right? So you want to make sure that you're onboarding safe and verifiable customers to your platform.
Yeah.
The other part of that too is that once you've onboarded a safe customer and that customer wants to start, submitting campaigns for approval, you should be like that first layer, right? You're the first set of eyeballs on their campaign, right? Their content, and you should be the expert also knowing what, are they missing? Is something missing in the privacy policy? Their opt-in is, all the required components there. Right. So you're the first layer of proofing for your customer's content. Once you approve it, then now that you can submit it through your system, whether it's through a portal or through the API to us.
Yeah. Yep.
And then this is another really important part of this. Sorry, Tim, didn't mean to cut you off
No,
there,
good.
but we're all part of this, and the expectation is that we're all in line and we're all monitoring this traffic. We're spot checking it because one of the other things that we see in the industry and the carriers really don't like is when a customer gets an approval for a use case. Let's say it's in the healthcare space or nutrition, right? And they get a good brand score, and the message content looks good, the website's fantastic, and then as they start running traffic, within a few hours, they start sending personal payday loan content on
Yeah.
that campaign, right? So that's sending an unapproved use case. It could be considered gray route. Nothing gets you in trouble faster is when basically customers start sending traffic that's non-compliant, right, for an approved vetted use case. So part of it is, and the responsibility is to make sure that you're spot checking your customers' traffic. We're trying to do the same. The DCA, they're trying to do the same, right? And we're just trying to keep the bad traffic off.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all that, Scott. I think you hit all the high notes, but like you mentioned, and we have a whole section on our website. If you just go over to commio.com, click on resources and blog, if you literally search for KYC, you're going to find a whole bunch of posts where we talk about KYC, including a really cool form that you can use within your own company to sort of document what KYC is, what are you capturing, anyway, because eventually, if something gets out of hand and some non-compliant traffic gets sent, you are going to be asked to produce your KYC documentation. So that's not to scare anybody away. It's just I feel like we sort of have professionalized communications in the last 2 years. Like it
Mhm.
started with stir shaken. Now we're at testing calls. We have to know our voice customers. Now we have to know our messaging customers. We've got all the documentation, we've got all the forms, we're making sure people are registering. It actually feels better as a provider this year than it ever has. But that doesn't mean that there isn't complications. It doesn't feel like it's tough to do. But, when you're sending compliant traffic and you're following the rules, it's just take a breath, look at the new rules, follow them, and you're going to be fine. And we send
Mhm.
so many messages now for so many customers. Oops. Sorry about
Mm.
that. Uh, that's what happens when let's see. I
Clicked
looked at
out of
the,
it. Yeah, I
yeah, we'll
just
just
thought of
leave it here.
something,
We'll leave it here.
last
Yeah.
thought, right, is
Yes,
like, when you're
please.
driving your car,
Right.
you always have to have your license, your registration and your insurance.
Yeah,
And you want to basically look at opt-in, proof of opt-in the same way. You always want to make sure that you have, registration and insurance for every one of your customers that you're sending messages to.
I love that. I love that.
No.
Which, but it's funny you said that because what short story is I've only been in two accidents that were pretty bad as a driver, and both of them
Mhm.
were I was sitting at a stoplight and somebody plowed into me from behind,
Uh,
and neither of them had insurance. So
uh,
we're getting to the point now, I figure a couple of years ago, most people were driving around without insurance, sending
mhm.
traffic, right?
Right.
Now we all have insurance, we have our documentation, and the good folks that are on the roads are anyway, they're following the rules and making the
Mhm.
roads safer. So anyway,
Yep. Good point.
Scott, hey,
Love it.
we went way overboard on this, but I love it. I think the content is what everybody needs from a refresher. So I mentioned we recorded this. We're gonna make the video available. Feel free to share it internally. And make sure you follow the links to those ebooks. And again, download them, print them, share them. And something, by the way, Scott, we've offered this before. I want to offer anybody, even if you're not a customer of ours, if you have a team that you're spinning up for compliance, if you're just getting into messaging and you feel like it'd be helpful to have somebody like me come in and present to one of your small team. If you have a new compliance czar who's going to be handling this, we'd love to do sort of one-on-one content, or we can even pull people together. So don't hesitate
Mhm.
to reply to the email that I'm going to send to you with this recording if you're just listening to this now, and let us know. We'd love to come in and help and educate folks because we've done it a handful of times, and I'd love to do more of that. So
That's
want to
awesome.
be a
Yep.
good partner, yeah. And yeah. So again, Scott, I know you're a busy guy, got a lot going on, so I'll let you go. But everybody on the call, watch for that email. Again, reply. I get all the replies. Make sure I get the answers. And if you're interested in reselling messaging or you need a messaging solution provider, we'd love to be in line to talk to you about that, potentially be a good provider of that service. So let's get on a demo and let's talk through it sometime soon. So
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
thank you,
it.
Scott. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.